On April 12, 2024, 19-year-old Anna Maria Guja waited at a bus stop on 31 August Street in Orhei, a small city in central Moldova. Her boyfriend was supposed to pick her up, but plans had changed at the last minute. Instead, a friend was on the way to fetch her. As the minutes ticked by, Anna Maria grew uneasy. It was getting late and no minibuses were running. When a car finally pulled up around 9 p.m., she felt a wave of relief. She climbed into the passenger seat, believing her ride had arrived. It was the last time anyone saw her alive. The disappearance of Anna Maria Guja would soon grip the entire nation of Moldova. In a country of just over 2.5 million people, crimes like this are rare and deeply shocking. Anna Maria wasn't just another face in the crowd. She was a beloved daughter, a devoted girlfriend, and an eager student training to become a teacher. She had grown up in the village of Susleni in Orhei district and was known for her bright smile and caring nature. By spring 2024, Anna Maria was studying at the Pedagogical College in Orhei, living in a student dormitory during the week. At 19, she had recently discovered she was going to be a mother, a fact that initially surprised her family but quickly filled them with joy. She had excitedly told her own mother, Maria Guja, just a month earlier, "You're going to be a young grandmother." The baby was a boy, and despite the challenges of an unplanned pregnancy, Anna Maria seemed happy and healthy, carrying on with her classes and even tutoring local children in her spare time. Friday, April 12th, began like any other day for Anna Maria. Early that morning, around 8 a.m., she called her mother as she did every day. During the call, she sounded upbeat. She was on her way to lectures at the college. Later, around 3 p.m. after classes, she phoned her mum again to say she was heading back to her dormitory to grab a bite to eat and rest a bit. Everything seemed normal. Anna Maria mentioned that in the late afternoon she had a tutoring appointment. She gave private lessons to a young boy in a nearby neighborhood called Nistriana. She planned to go there and then return to the dorm for the evening. In the meantime, Anna Maria's boyfriend, 21-year-old Ion Mokan, was finishing his workday. Ion and Anna Maria had been together for 4 years, practically since she was in her mid-teens. Ion used to work as a guard in a prison for a while. By 2024, he was driving a taxi in Orhei, living in a village called Vatici, not far away. The two were excited about the baby on the way, but like any young couple, they had their ups and downs. That day, unfortunately, they'd had a small argument over the phone. It was nothing extraordinary, a little misunderstanding that left both frustrated. That evening, Anna Maria finished the tutoring session later than expected. By about 9 p.m., she found herself at the top of Nistriana Street, near an intersection, trying to get back to her dorm. The night was cool, and darkness had settled in. She discovered, to her annoyance, that no minibuses were coming at that hour. In many parts of Moldova, public transport between villages and town slows down or stops at night. So, she called Ion for help. It was around 8:57 p.m. when Ion received a WhatsApp message from her, saying essentially, "There are no buses. Can you come get me?" Ion, still a bit contrite about their earlier quarrel, immediately sprang into action. He couldn't personally leave right that second, so he told her he would send a friend, a man named Tolia, to pick her up and drive her safely to the dormitory. After dropping her at the dorm, Ion planned to come meet her so they could patch things up. Anna Maria was reluctant at first. Still annoyed, she told him not to bother sending anyone and said she would start walking on her own. But Ion was persistent, urging her not to walk alone at night. As he later recounted, he stayed on the phone with her as she walked toward a bus stop at a main intersection, pleading with her to wait. "I kept telling her, 'I'm sending a car, don't go on foot,'" he said. By the time she reached the bus stop near a traffic light, he had convinced her to stay put for the friend's car. Ion quickly rang his friend Tolia, someone Anna Maria knew as an acquaintance. and asked him to hurry over to pick her up. Tolea agreed and headed out. Ion relayed a description of the car and told Anna Maria over the phone, "Wait at the stop. He's coming for you." Then Ion texted her to confirm the arrangement. "Tolea is on his way. Let me know when you're in the car." Alone under the streetlight, Anna Maria waited. The street, normally modestly busy in daytime, was largely deserted at this late hour. A few houses nearby had their lights off. Orhei isn't a big city and tends to quiet down at night. One can imagine Anna Maria shifting on her feet, a little tired from her long day, one hand resting instinctively on her belly. Perhaps she was still thinking about the argument with Ion, or maybe her mind was on the exam she had coming up at college, or on what to eat when she got back to the dorm. She pulled her phone from her pocket to check the time. It was approaching 9:57 p.m. Where was that car? Just then, headlights approached. A vehicle was coming up the road toward the bus stop. It slowed down and pulled over. Anna Maria's phone buzzed with a message from Ion. He was asking if the friend had arrived. At 9:57, she quickly typed back one word. "Bine. Okay," in Romanian. Moments later, at 9:59 p.m., she texted Ion again. "I got in the car." Those 4 words would haunt Ion forever. He sighed with relief when he saw her message. Finally, she was safe in a car and on her way. He relaxed, thinking the worst of the night, their silly fight and her brief stubbornness, was over. He even started planning how he would apologize properly when he saw her later that night. But 5 minutes later, around 10:05 p.m., Ion's phone lit up with a message from his friend Tolea. "I'm at the bus stop, but she's not here. I don't see her anywhere." Ion's stomach dropped. At first, he thought it must be a misunderstanding or a bad joke. After all, Anna Maria had literally just told him she got into a car. He immediately tried calling Anna Maria's phone. No answer. He sent her a flurry of texts. "Where are you?" "Tolea is there waiting for you. Are you okay?" No reply. Each passing second amplified his dread. By 10:10 p.m. or so, when the phone went completely unreachable, Ion knew something was very, very wrong. Ion raced to the dormitory and the surrounding area, hoping this was some mix-up. Maybe she had gotten a ride straight to the dorm and was there waiting for him. But she wasn't. He called her mother, Maria, to check if Anna Maria might have somehow gone back home to Suzleni village. No, she hadn't. Maria Guja, who had been expecting her daughter's nightly call after tutoring, had received nothing. Now she learned from Ion that Anna Maria was missing. A feeling of icy panic washed over her. Maria tried to remain calm. Perhaps there was a simple explanation. Perhaps the car she took dropped her off elsewhere, or her phone battery died, or she decided to go to a friend's place and forgot to tell anyone. But deep down, Maria felt something was off. "She always calls me every evening without fail," Maria later said. That night I got no call. For a daughter who kept in close touch, going completely silent was uncharacteristic. Within the next hour, Anna Maria's family and boyfriend were frantically searching and calling around. Ion did another loop of the bus stop area with Tolea, double-checking that they hadn't missed her somehow. They even wondered, could she have gotten tired of waiting and started walking along the road? But a pregnant woman walking alone at night would have been easily spotted, and she wasn't on any roadside. They asked a few people in the vicinity if they'd seen a young pregnant girl in a white tank top and black pants. No one had. By roughly midnight, 4 hours after Anna Maria's last message, Ion and Maria went to the police to report her missing. In some parts of the world, authorities hesitate to treat an adult as missing so soon, but in Moldova, the police took this seriously from the start. The circumstances, a 6 months pregnant teenager disappearing in the span of a few minutes, were alarming enough to raise immediate red flags. Officers at the Orhei Police Inspectorate listened as Ion explained the bizarre situation. She said she got into a car, but the friend who went to get her found no sign of her. They showed the officers the text messages time-stamped that night. This was clearly no ordinary runaway or miscommunication. It looked like Anna Maria had quite literally vanished into thin air. Before dawn on April 13th, police and volunteers began combing the area where she was last seen. Flashlights swept over ditches and empty lots. They searched behind bushes, in alleyways, anywhere someone might have gone if they got out of a car on the roadside, as the mystery driver had allegedly claimed. There was no trace, not a single clue. Maria, desperate for answers, clung to hope that maybe her daughter was still alive somewhere, maybe taken in by someone. But as the hours turned into a full day, fear tightened its grip on everyone. News of Anna Maria's disappearance spread quickly through Orhai and then the rest of Moldova. By the next day, April 13th, local media had picked up the story. 19-year-old pregnant woman missing after getting into a stranger's car. On social networks, posts about Anna Maria went viral. Her photo, a beautiful brown-eyed girl with a gentle smile, was shared thousands of times. Many who saw it felt a chill, thinking, that could have been my daughter, my sister, my friend. It was every parent's nightmare. Within a short time, Anna Maria's case became the most followed news in the country. People were riveted and horrified by the scenario. A young woman, expecting a child, disappears without a trace after accepting a ride at night. The police established a special task force to investigate and find Anna Maria. They interviewed Ion and Tolea extensively, but it was clear these two young men were desperately trying to find her and had no hand in her disappearance. Investigators asked Ion tough questions. Did Anna Maria have any enemies? Did she have any reason to run away? Problems at home, at school? The answer was always no. By all accounts, Anna Maria was happy and excited about her future. She had loving family and friends. There was absolutely no indication she would willingly disappear. This was looking increasingly like a criminal abduction. One of the first breaks in the case came from technology. Orhai is a small city, but it does have some surveillance cameras, especially near main intersections. Police canvassed the area around the bus stop and managed to retrieve CCTV footage from a nearby shop and traffic camera. What they saw sent shivers down their spines. Grainy video showed the silhouette of a young woman matching Anna Maria's appearance climbing into a dark-coloured car around 9 p.m. that night, exactly as Ion had described. The car then drove off, heading out of Orhai. Crucially, the cameras caught enough detail for officers to identify the vehicle. It was a dark Ford sedan. Even better, one camera angle got a partial view of the license plate. By cross-referencing the plate and car model in their database, the police identified a single likely owner, Guja Kotorobai, a 45-year-old man from Chitskani Vechi, a village in the neighbouring Telenesh district. The name immediately drew attention in the police station. Guja Kotorobai was not an unknown figure. He was a former policeman himself, having served in the late 1990s, and more recently had worked as a prison guard. The idea that an ex-cop might be involved in the disappearance of a young woman was unsettling, to say the least. Investigators quickly dug into his background. Kotorobai had left the police force after just a short stint decades ago, and from 2020 until mid-2023, he'd been employed as a guard at a juvenile detention centre. He quit that job after falling ill with COVID-19, at which point he became unemployed. He lived alone in a rural area, apparently tending to some agricultural land he owned. Neighbours in Chitskani Vechi described him as a quiet, if somewhat aloof man, who mostly kept to himself. He had 2 children from a previous marriage, but they lived abroad with his ex-wife after a divorce a few years earlier. Some people who knew the family whispered that he had been abusive toward his wife before she left him. Others said they hadn't seen obvious aggression, but noted he had changed physically over time, gaining weight and looking more dishevelled in recent months. There were even rumours that since losing his job, he'd been drinking heavily and had become short-tempered. In short, Kotorobai wasn't exactly a model citizen, but he also wasn't on anyone's radar for violent crime. Until now. On April 16th, 4 days after Anna Maria went missing, police moved in on Guja Kotorobai. By then, they had enough circumstantial evidence to consider him the prime suspect. He was positively identified as the driver who picked her up, and he had left Orhai with her in his car. Officers drove out to Chitskani Vechi, a village about 20-some kilometers away, to find this man. Arriving at Kotorobai's house, which sat at the edge of the village near some fields, the police knocked on the door and announced themselves. Kotorobai answered, looking wary. When they asked to come in and speak with him, he refused outright. Perhaps he thought as a former officer he could talk his way out of scrutiny, or maybe he was hiding something inside. The police didn't force entry right then. Instead, they quickly obtained a search warrant from a judge, which, under Moldovan law, can be done within hours in urgent cases. With warrant in hand, they entered Kotorobai's home and began a thorough search. What they found raised even more alarms. Inside the house and in his car, officers discovered various personal items that appeared to belong to women. There were bits of female clothing, accessories, maybe even traces like a hair tie or earring, things that Kotorobai, a middle-aged divorced man living alone, shouldn't normally have. Could these have been Anna Maria's belongings? Her distraught mother would later confirm that some items, like a piece of jewelry and part of her clothing, were indeed her daughter's. It also made investigators wonder, were there possibly other victims? Why did he have multiple things for women stored away? To find out, the police issued an unusual public appeal. They released Guja Kotorobai's photo and details to the media and urged any women who had experienced dubious or criminal interactions with this man to come forward. This was a chilling indication that authorities suspected Kotorobai might be a serial predator, or at least that Anna Maria's case might not be his first offense. However, no prior victims definitively emerged in those early days. It's quite possible that if he had attempted similar crimes before, they went unreported, or thankfully, perhaps Anna Maria was the first and only time he acted on such impulses. Kotorobai was taken into custody on April 16th, initially on suspicion of kidnapping. In Moldova's legal system, it's common to start with whatever charge is immediately provable while the investigation continues. At that moment, they had evidence he'd unlawfully taken her somewhere against her will. But without a body or knowledge of her fate yet, they couldn't charge murder. Prosecutors announced that once sufficient evidence was gathered, the charges would be upgraded. The Orhei court quickly authorized Kotorobai to be held for an initial 30-day period in pre-trial detention, which is standard practice to prevent a suspect from fleeing or tampering with evidence. From the start of his arrest, Guja Kotorobai stonewalled the investigation. He refused to cooperate, answering almost no questions. He did offer one self-serving story to the police. He claimed that yes, he had picked up a girl in Orhei that night, but he insisted it was just a normal hitchhiker situation. According to him, as soon as the young woman realized he wasn't the specific ride she expected, she asked to get out. He said he pulled over on the outskirts of town, let her out about 300 meters from the bus stop, and then simply drove on without her. In his version, whatever happened to her after that was not his responsibility. In other words, he was suggesting that Anna Maria might have gotten out of his car unharmed, and then, who knows? Perhaps he wanted police to think she ran off or got picked up by someone else. It was an absurd claim, given that all her loved ones knew she would never vanish voluntarily, and the fact that her phone had been turned off right after she got in his car. Investigators didn't buy his story for a second. They noted he showed no concern for the fact that a girl who'd been in his vehicle was now missing. An innocent person would presumably be alarmed or at least cooperative when told their passenger disappeared. Instead, Kotorobai was combative and defiant. While Kotorobai sat in jail maintaining his silence and lies, the hunt for Anna Maria intensified. As days passed with no sign of the young woman, the community rallied together. Hundreds of volunteers joined police and emergency personnel in extensive search parties across Orhei and beyond. The case was now national news, updated daily on TV and online. The image from CCTV of Anna Maria stepping into that dark Ford was broadcast widely, and it was heart-wrenching to watch, a stark reminder of how quickly an everyday moment can turn tragic. By April 18th and 19th, search efforts shifted focus to Telenești district, specifically around the suspect's home turf. Based on certain new circumstances and clues, police had reason to believe Anna Maria might be in that area. One piece of evidence that guided them was another surveillance camera, incredibly. Investigators had managed to obtain footage from a camera near Kotorobai's house. What it showed was disturbing. At some point during the night of April 12th or early the next morning, that camera allegedly captured Anna Maria inside the suspect's house. According to the head of the National Police, Viorel Kernauțianu, the video indicated that Anna Maria was alive and walking. He phrased it as, she left on her own feet, out of Kotorobai's house in the early hours after her abduction. If true, this meant she had been held captive in his home for several hours, likely tortured during that time, and then moved elsewhere. The footage then showed her re-entering Kotorobai's car. After that, both she and the car disappeared from camera view. This was a crucial lead. It strongly suggested that Kotorobai had transported her away from the house, presumably to some remote location in Telenești. That's why search teams started scouring the countryside around Chitskani Vechi village, extending to nearby forests, fields, and streams where a body might be hidden. The terrain in that part of Moldova is gently rolling, with patches of woodland, small rivers, and rural farmland. In spring, the fields are soggy and some trees are still leafless, making it both easier and eerily stark to search through. Volunteers trudged through mud, peered into wells and ravines, and even poked sticks into piles of leaves or loose earth, fearing they might find freshly turned soil. One group of volunteers had come all the way from the capital, Chisinau, to help. They divided the area into grids and systematically looked for any clue, pieces of clothing, tracks, disturbed ground. They told us to search every forest, around every pond, in all the holes. One exhausted volunteer explained to a TV reporter, reflecting the thoroughness of the search. The police coordinated closely, directing them to areas of interest. Morale among the searchers swung between determination and dread. Everyone wanted to find Anna Maria, but no one wanted to be the one to find her lifeless. On April 20th, 8 days after Anna Maria vanished, the worst fears were confirmed. A search team in Telenești district came upon a remote wooded area near a stream, a place frequented more by wild animals than people. In a shallow ravine, they noticed a pile of branches and leaves that looked unnaturally arranged. Beneath it, they discovered a hole or pit in the ground, and in that hole was the body of a young woman. She had been hastily dumped there, likely in an attempt to conceal her. The location was about 21 kilometers away from Gheorghe Kotorobai's house. When officers at the scene radioed in the description, a female body, dark hair, about 1.65 meters tall, wearing black pants, a white top, and visibly pregnant, there was no doubt left. It was Anna Maria. News of the discovery hit the community like a gut punch. For over a week, everyone had held on to a glimmer of hope that maybe she could be found alive, perhaps held captive somewhere. That hope was now shattered. The nation collectively mourned as the tragic outcome became known. Anna Maria's body was transported to the coroner's office for an autopsy, while crime scene specialists combed the remote site for evidence. They noted that the victim's remains showed clear signs of violence. Even to an untrained eye, it was obvious this was no peaceful death. This young woman had suffered horribly. When the forensic medical examination was completed, its findings were so disturbing that authorities were initially reluctant to detail them publicly. But Moldova's investigative journalists soon uncovered the grim truth. Ziarul de Garda, a prominent newspaper, reported from sources that Anna Maria's body bore marks of torture. She had been sexually assaulted. There were needle punctures on her left arm, suggesting she may have been injected with some substance, possibly a sedative to subdue her, or perhaps it was another sadistic form of torment. Even more shocking, the killer had burned her with cigarettes. Multiple round burn marks were found on her hands. These details painted a picture of unthinkable cruelty. One could hardly imagine the terror and pain Anna Maria endured in her final hours. Ultimately, the autopsy concluded that she died from an open cranial trauma. In other words, severe head injuries. She had likely been struck in the head repeatedly with a heavy, blunt object, causing fatal wounds. The timeline of her ordeal, as investigators pieced it together, was harrowing. From the evidence, prosecutors believe that after picking up Anna Maria around 9 p.m. in Orhei, Kotorabai drove a short distance through the city. At some point, perhaps when she grew suspicious, or if she tried to use her phone, he made his move. He forced her into the trunk of his car. This was likely how he managed to restrain her for the drive to his home without attracting attention. If she screamed, no one would hear from inside the boot. He then drove roughly 40 kilometers, about 25 miles, to his house in Telenesh district. Arriving there later that night, he dragged the terrified young woman inside. Neighbors in that quiet village didn't report hearing anything unusual that night. Perhaps the house was isolated enough, or maybe she was too frightened and subdued to cry out loudly. Inside the house, between late April 12th and the early morning of April 13th, Kotorabai beat and raped Anna Maria. The torture evidence suggests he took his time inflicting pain. The cigarette burns indicate a deliberate, prolonged cruelty. One can only hope that shock or drugs might have dulled some of her suffering, but we cannot know for sure. At some point during those dark hours, possibly in the very early morning, he decided to move her. Why? Maybe he thought she was near death and didn't want her body found in his home. Or perhaps, in some twisted logic, he wanted to commit the final act elsewhere. The surveillance footage indicates she was alive around 4 a.m., walking out of his house under his coercion. Perhaps he threatened her with a weapon to keep her compliant as they got back into his car. Then he drove to a secluded forested strip of land he knew. After all, he was a local and likely familiar with remote spots. There, amidst the trees by a stream, away from any witnesses, he bludgeoned Anna Maria to death. The prosecutors later said that he struck her multiple times, including brutal blows to the head, until she stopped breathing. In one merciless act, he snuffed out not only the life of a promising young woman, but also the unborn son she carried. When he was done, he dumped her in that shallow pit, quickly covering her with branches and leaves in a pathetic attempt to hide the atrocity. Then he left, presumably returning home as if nothing happened. Anna Maria's family was beyond devastated at the confirmation of her death. Her mother Maria had to be supported by relatives as she wept, heartbroken, crying out that her daughter and grandchild were gone. Ion, the boyfriend, was racked with guilt and sorrow. He kept replaying that night in his mind, wondering if there was anything he could have done differently to save her. But logically, no one blamed Ion. The fault lay entirely with the predator who had crossed their paths. It's hard to overstate how deeply this crime shook Moldova. People were not only grief-stricken, they were angry. How could a young woman simply trying to get home end up the victim of such barbarity? How could someone who once wore a police badge commit a crime so heinous? In online forums and on the streets, Moldovans began to ask hard questions about the safety of women and the prevalence of violence. Anna Maria Guja was laid to rest on April 23, 2024, in her home village of Suzleni. Hundreds of people attended her funeral. Villagers, classmates from her college, teachers, and even strangers moved by her story came to pay respects. Her fellow students from the pedagogical college stood sobbing, holding flowers, struggling to come to terms with the loss of their friend, who, just days ago, had been laughing in class with them. Ion was there too, standing near her coffin with tears in his eyes, saying a final goodbye to the girl he thought he would marry one day. Maria, the mother, was inconsolable, supported by family members as the local priest intoned prayers. The small community cemetery filled with cries and the silence of shock. They buried Anna Maria and her unborn baby boy together, 2 lives extinguished far too soon. It was a scene of profound sadness that those in attendance would never forget. With the recovery of Anna Maria's body, the legal case against Gheorghe Kotorabai moved into high gear. The evidence was now overwhelming. Prosecutors promptly added the charge of intentional murder with aggravating circumstances, specifically murder of a pregnant woman, to the kidnapping charge, under Moldova's Criminal Code Article 145 Part 2E. This charge carries a punishment of 15 to 20 years in prison, or even life imprisonment given the brutality involved. They also included charges of rape and sexual violence. Kotorabai continued to assert his innocence, but his protestations rang hollow. Forensic experts had collected a trove of evidence. DNA tests were done on samples from Anna Maria's clothing and body. Biological traces likely tied Kotorabai to the crime. There was also the CCTV footage timeline tracking his car and movements, the items of hers found in his possession, and possibly even his own cell phone records or car GPS data, which might have placed him near the crime scene. By the time the case was ready for trial, investigators had gathered sufficient conclusive proof, according to the Orhei prosecutor's office. They had video evidence, witness testimony, and numerous expert reports. Everything needed to directly prove Kotorabai's guilt, as one of the Guja family's lawyers later remarked. One question hanging over the case was whether Gheorghe Kotorabai was mentally sound during the crime. Sometimes perpetrators of exceptionally violent acts attempt an insanity defense. In line with procedure, Kotorabai underwent a psychiatric evaluation. The results came back clear. He was legally sane and fully responsible for his actions, with no chronic mental illness or personality disorder that could diminish his culpability. The horror he unleashed could not be excused by any insanity claim. Throughout the investigation, Kotorabai remained obstinate. At one point, he bizarrely requested a polygraph test to prove he was telling the truth. The prosecutors saw this as a stalling tactic or a publicity stunt and denied the request, likely because they already had concrete evidence, and polygraphs aren't admissible as proof of innocence. His behavior was erratic. His first lawyer floated a peculiar argument to the press, that Kotorabai was suffering from some illness and on medications which could push him to commit such a crime. This sounded almost like a half-hearted excuse, and it did not sit well with the public. In fact, due to intense public outrage, that initial defense lawyer withdrew from the case, citing the immense pressure and perhaps a distaste for defending a man widely seen as a monster. The court appointed a new attorney for Kotorabai, as is required to ensure he had representation. But even with legal counsel, he persisted in claiming he had nothing to do with Anna Maria's death. Because Moldova's justice system does not use jury trials for such cases, Kotorabai's fate was to be decided by professional judges. The trial began in late 2024 at the Orhei District Court. It was a trial closely watched by the public and media. The proceedings revealed the full narrative of the crime in painstaking detail. The prosecution presented the timeline, how Kotorabai lured or forced Anna Maria, the evidence of her captivity, the injuries she sustained, and the forensic link tying him to the murder. They showed the harrowing surveillance footage and read messages from Anna Maria's phone aloud, such as that final text, "I got in the car," which sent audible gasps through the courtroom. Family members and witnesses were called to testify. Ion told the court about that night's communications and the agony of realizing something had gone wrong. Maria testified to her daughter's habits and state of mind, emphasizing that Anna Maria would never simply disappear, underscoring that this was abduction and murder, not anything voluntary. Police officers described finding the body and the evidence collected. Each piece of testimony tightened the noose around Kotorabai's defense. All the while, the defendant sat there shaking his head, insisting that everyone else was wrong, or even conspiring against him. In a dramatic move, Gheorghe Kotorabai alleged that the video evidence was fabricated. He claimed the surveillance footage showing Anna Maria with him had been doctored somehow. He accused the investigators of framing him and said he was being pressured to confess to a crime he didn't commit. These accusations were thoroughly debunked. Prosecutors openly addressed them, revealing that Kotorabai had formally complained of being pressed to make statements, which prompted an internal inquiry. That inquiry found his claims baseless, and he never contested the official conclusion that rejected his allegations of coercion. In short, the court determined that his rights had been respected, and his claims of planted evidence or forced confession were pure fiction. By early January 2025, the trial reached its conclusion. On January 9, 2025, the judge, Magistrate Mihail Proka of the Orhei Court, delivered the verdict. Gheorghe Kotorabai was found guilty on all counts: kidnapping, rape, and the intentional murder of Anna Maria Guja with exceptional cruelty. Given the brutality and the fact that the victim was pregnant, the court showed no leniency. Kotorabai was sentenced to life in prison, the maximum penalty under Moldovan law. In addition, he was ordered to pay 2 million lei, approximately 110,000 US dollars, to Anna Maria's family as moral damages, and over 500,000 lei, around 27,000 US dollars, to cover legal expenses. These monetary awards, while significant, were of course little comfort for the loss of a beloved life. They did, however, send a message that the courts recognized the profound harm done. The courtroom was packed on sentencing day. Reporters, women's rights activists, and ordinary citizens had come to see justice served. As the judge read out the life sentence, a tense silence fell in the hall. In the back, Anna Maria's mother Maria clasped her hands tightly, tears in her eyes. When she heard the words, "detenție pe viață," life detention, she quietly nodded. Later she would say, "We feel that justice has been done." There is no joy in such a moment, but there is relief. Relief that the man responsible will never walk free to hurt anyone again. Standing near Maria was Elena Kohokaru, the lawyer who represented the Guja family. She had tears of relief too, and told the media that all of Kotorabai's protestations of innocence had been completely demolished by the evidence presented in court. "We are satisfied with this fair and correct sentence," she said. And what of Gheorghe Kotorobai in that moment? True to form, he did not take the verdict quietly. Just before the decision was announced, he had given a last statement to journalists, stubbornly declaring, "I am innocent. I didn't take that girl in my car. The videos show someone else. I don't agree with this. I did not commit this crime. All the evidence in this case is fake and with my friends. They will publish it, and you'll see it's impossible for me to have done this." His defiance was absolute, almost delusional in the face of such proof. When the life sentence was pronounced, witnesses say Kotorabai suddenly became pale and started breathing heavily. He slumped as if he might faint, claiming to feel unwell, creating a brief moment of chaos in the courtroom. Some speculated it was a final act of theatrics, a dramatic reaction, either from shock or an attempt to delay being led off to prison. Guards tended to him for a moment, but he was fine. It was time for him to go. As he was escorted out in handcuffs, Kotorabai looked towards Maria Guja, the mother of the girl he had murdered, but he said nothing. In fact, he had never once apologized or directly addressed Anna Maria's family throughout the trial. His lack of remorse was as cold as the crime he committed. Under Moldovan law, Kotorabai had 15 days to appeal the verdict. Given his insistence of innocence, it's likely he filed an appeal to the higher court, the Court of Appeal, to contest the life sentence. However, considering the strength of the evidence, any appeal would be a long shot at best, perhaps only seeking a reduction of sentence or some technical overturn. As of this story's telling, he remains behind bars, starting what will most likely be the rest of his life in prison. In Moldova, a life sentence truly means spending decades incarcerated. There is no parole for at least 30 years, and even then, release is rare. Kotorabai was 45 at sentencing. Barring an unlikely successful appeal, he will never be a free man again, living out his days in a high-security cell. Anna Maria's murder did more than devastate one family. It sparked a national conversation and a wave of activism against violence toward women. Anna Maria's case was a turning point. The sheer brutality of the crime and the innocence of the victim, young, pregnant, not involved in any high-risk lifestyle, simply going about her everyday life, struck a chord. Many saw in her the reflection of every young woman's vulnerability in a society where violence can lurk in unexpected places. The fact that the perpetrator was an older man, a former authority figure, added to the outrage. It embodied a sense of betrayal and abuse of power. And so, in the days following the discovery of her body, civil society groups mobilized. On April 23, 2024, the same day as Anna Maria's funeral, dozens of protesters gathered in front of the Moldovan government building in Chisinau. These were members of feminist organizations, students, and ordinary citizens, all horrified by what had happened. They held signs reading, "Stop killing women," and "Justice for Anna Maria." They chanted and used bullhorns to call for action. and they observed a moment of silence for Anna Maria and all victims of gender-based violence. One organizer then led a gut-wrenching scream, a scream for all the unheard women, and the crowd joined in, their voices echoing across the great National Assembly Square. It was an expression of collective pain and fury that something like this could happen. This was not a one-off event either. Every Wednesday for weeks, protesters returned to the government square, demanding concrete changes. In response, the Moldovan parliament organized a public hearing on April 30th, 2024, to discuss the issue and possible legal reforms. The consensus was clear. Moldova needed to call this violence what it is and step up efforts to combat it. A legislative initiative spearheaded by Duina German, a vice president of parliament known for advocating women's rights, was introduced. By the end of July 2024, just a few months after Anna Maria's murder, the parliament passed a law amending existing legislation to include the term femicide. This amendment, effective August 15, 2024, defined femicide as an act of violence against a woman or girl resulting in the victim's death, whether as the outcome of intentional murder, grievous bodily harm leading to death, domestic violence, or coerced suicide committed out of gender-based prejudice. In other words, it formally recognized that when women are killed in contexts of gender-based hatred or domestic abuse, it is a specific phenomenon that needs to be tracked and fought. In Moldova, as new policies and laws take effect, people continue to remember Anna Maria. At the Pedagogical College in Orhei, where her desk now sits empty, classmates created a small memorial with her photo and candles, promising that the future educators among them will carry forward the lesson that every life is precious. In Susleni, her home village, locals planted a tree in her memory, so that each year its blossoms will remind them of the gentle soul who once walked their streets. Thanks so much for listening. If you're interested in rarely heard solved global murder cases, consider giving us a follow. And if you're enjoying the podcast, we'd be thrilled if you would give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast app. It really helps us a lot. See you next time.